Hello, thank you for joining me today. Now, there's been an ongoing and sometimes raging debate on whether gig platforms offer gig workers competitive opportunities, dignity, and mobility, or whether platforms actually exploit gig workers by offering cutthroat rates and abysmal terms of work. My guests today believe it's the latter. They believe that gig platforms are exploitative and are also deeply hypocritical. To understand some of the issues that we fail to see as customers who use these platforms, and also to understand how to interpret some of the statements that have been made by ministers in the government of India recently, I'm talking today to Nikhil. He's the founder of the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, and Rakshita Swamy, founder of SUFFER, or Social Accountability Forum for Action and Research. They've worked for decades on people's right to information and citizens' movements, as well as on labor issues, including the gig platform workers law that was enacted in Rajasthan recently. This debate has been ongoing, but there are new triggers every now and then. The latest one is Urban Company, which offers a host of professional services, offering us what it called the Insta Maid, which it then changed into the Insta Help service, where domestic workers were being offered, or domestic help was being offered at a hourly rate of 49 rupees. Do you want to let's start there?
Just to clarify, Urban Company is not the only company that's offering
Sure.
these services. I think it's the one that caught the most attention because of the advertisement and
Yes.
just the kind of a self-congratulatory pitch that they made about providing this kind of a service, and also congratulating themselves about this being an effort to organize workers and bringing them from an informal sphere to a formal sphere. There are many such apps like Broomies, Book My Buy,
Yeah.
Made Hub, Snabit, and it's that indignity extends through multiple platforms. And this was an extension of what these apps and aggregators are doing, of basically declaring themselves as nothing but digital interfaces which connects a person demanding a service to the person who's supplying that service, and in that process absolving themselves from any responsibility, accountability, or obligation towards its workers. So we see that this is now, while different kinds of employment have been gigified through the process over the past decade, we are seeing that now there is a much more rapid attempt of trying to do this in the case of domestic work. And the trigger was that much more important because this is at least a sector in which there are many movements, organizations, and collective action has brought a certain degree of rights to domestic workers, which stand to be completely undermined if this nature of work now comes under gig work and they lose those rights that they have won through decades of struggle.
The gig and platform economy is actually defining the future nature of work. And I think it's worth taking a
Yeah.
couple of steps back to say that what it has done is that this uh, digital platforms, has enabled uh, the entire, what would one would call a task-based economy, because the task-based economy is something that allows you not to have an employer. You can just give your one contract job, and it's a series of micro contracts, because then you're, as an employer, you're done with your responsibility. You wanted a task done, you got that task done, you're finished, and you don't have other responsibilities. Whereas working relationships have always worked towards people carrying out their task, generally on a full-time basis as far as possible. And with that full-time basis came a set of responsibilities between the employer and the employee. That's why at the heart of the battle between workers and employers, you will find that the battle is that all the time gig and platform economy people are saying that we are not employers, they are not our employees. They're free to come when they come, free to go when they go, and we provide a huge amount of freedom. And that's the misnomer, because actually they want people on their platform. They want them to stick there. Then, as they want to do better, they have to impose terms and conditions on them. And every contract is a term and condition, actually. So India for years has seen right across the unorganized sector work done on a piece rate basis. I will work for so many hours and do this. The entire unorganized sector is actually like that. Only this has enabled it even more, and it's enabled it across the board on something where we are able to see that. So, what is at the heart of what we are saying? We are saying if you do this, you must regulate this. What you talked about, that the latest trigger has been
Yeah.
uh, Insta Maids, or whether you call it Insta Help or whatever else. It's also the same thing, whether you were dealing with plumbers or you were dealing with electricians or you were dealing with hair cutting or beauticians, or you will tomorrow at one end of the spectrum deal with doctors and lawyers as well on a kind of contract basis. And the other end of the spectrum is what we are seeing, where even the Minister for Commerce actually said that the new platforms or these new startups are actually looking
Yeah.
to exploit unemployed.
I've got the quote. Indian startups need a reality check. They're too focused on food delivery apps using unemployed youth as cheap labor. What do you make of this statement?
Just to go back to your earlier question and link it, is that it is actually just an indication that even your delivery workers were the it's an acknowledgement by government that the delivery workers, you're just using an unemployed workforce and you're exploiting them as cheap labor. And here, as far as the maids were concerned, were a workforce that would spend decades organizing themselves. And by organizing themselves, managing to get some form of collective bargaining. In some states, they've even got minimum wage rights. Now, where will your minimum wage rights go on this platform? And if you do not regulate the platform, and that's why the core of our point and of all the workers' points has been that if you want to enter this labor market and you want to influence it in this way, then you must be subject to minimum regulation. That's the only way in which the workers will get some kind of fair deal. And what is the nature of that is what these laws contain, the effort to try and figure out.
You co-authored a piece in the Hindu where you've talked about this particular issue, and you talk about the labor market that you will see in street, in most cities and towns, where people who are looking for daily work are sort of hanging around. Many of them carpenters, some of them plumbers, some of them just people who are laborers who can work with their hand. And you talked about this system of the thekedar and the reverse auction, so the lowest rate worker would get the job or would get hired. You've extended this idea to the gig platform, and you say the gig platforms are actually like this thekedar, many raised to the power of n. You want to just explain that a bit?
Yeah, and our analogy was to try and bring this point home, that exactly how you described it, because what we're seeing and because it's also that through our interactions with gig workers, with their unions, with their collectives, to try and understand how this is panning out, it's also becoming very clear, and that's why we brought that analogy of the classic case of
Yeah.
workers are waiting, the helplessness with which they're standing, the choicelessness with which they have to take up whatever is at offer, and look what they're having to choose between a low wage rate or no wage.
No wage. Yeah.
And it's that's actually what is being replicated, and it was very important to make that point because it's exploitation occurs in various kinds of workers. I mean, amongst different sectors where you have labor coming together. But here, in the case of gig work, we've seen that this exploitation is. I mean, it's also sort of the dressing over is made to look, which is what even the problem with that whole tweet and assertion of the founder of Urban Company was, that
Yeah.
there's one level that's exploitation, but actually we're trying to say that this is something very glorified, this is something very dignified, we're giving people the choice, and it's actually bringing them from the realm of informality to formality. So to bring that point home, that actually none of this is happening, it's that same thing that is being imposed on a digital platform,
It's
and
just
there's
dressed very differently and dressed it with
dressed
a
very
positive
different.
twist. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the fact that digital technology underpins it makes it that much more dangerous, the way at least it's being used by aggregators today. And the kinds of, I mean, you had oppressive management in other places, you had oppressive contractors. Here you have an oppressive algorithm, which is
Mm.
even more hard to identify, to chase, to argue against. So that's why that imagery was also sort of important for us to be able to also articulate.
Did this result in them changing it? Because I was reading that it seems the actual rate for this Insta help service that was being taught, that we are discussing it with this particular illustration, was 245 rupees an hour and not 49 rupees, which was a limited offer. Do you buy that, or is that, you think, a
No, I
quick
mean, response, sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, the fact that they changed from Insta Made to Insta Help, and again made it seem like this was such a sensitive and progressive thing to do. The
yeah.
fact that you feel you can just change a name and change nothing about the fundamentals of the operation. And secondly, the rate at which it was, I mean, we are not even arguing that it's the 49 rupees. Yes, it's very clear that's how, and because we've seen the precedents, we've
Mm.
seen how Uber drivers, Ola drivers were offered such great rates to begin
Yeah.
with. Like how, I mean, data was just shared with people almost free of cost. Once everyone's on your database is when you hike the prices. So similarly, we've seen that this is their modus operandi. They do draw in and attract workers, and we have heard countless stories of how drivers have actually taken cars on loans, are paying EMIs, and once they've gotten onto the system, is when the aggregators and their algorithms, their controls, then start squeezing. And I mean, and it's obviously always the poor workers who are going to be have to squeezed to protect some kind of a notional bottom line that they have to protect.
Yeah, I
So
think
yeah.
one other thing to understand in this whole public discourse, because soon after our piece, whether it was rejoined or not, they wrote a piece saying,
Yes, in the Economic
right,
Times.
this is not quite like that. And then on this whole point on what is the wage rate, and then often in all the arguments for regulation, someone or the other
Mm.
comes up and says, "Oh, but we are doing this great insurance scheme, or our practice is
Mm.
like this." The point of regulation is that it's a minimum standard across the board. What you do, you continue to do. If you're so great, do it. Of course, regulation will not hurt you at all. But for you to say this, I do this and this applies across the board, is just no argument at all.
No, and in fact, in that particular piece that you're referring to, they say that there are many things that are offered, like insurance, which are that are not legally mandated on them to do. So they're making a virtue of the fact that they're doing it voluntarily.
Yeah, so do it voluntarily once you follow the minimum amounts that has to be done and let everyone follow it.
Mm.
That's how an industry standard is set. That's how a working relationship is set. And that's been our big problem, that why are you fighting regulation? Because these very people who say that they are doing such great things and are spending so much
Mm.
time and money and effort to say they're doing great things are the ones who are actually opposing regulation and minimum amounts of regulation. They should be out there saying that this is great, because there's every time we've sat with them, how can anyone argue
Mm.
against a minimum wage? How can anyone argue against social security? And to say that I'm doing social security more than that, then do more than that, but follow that amount that the law would lay down for everyone.
What were some of the things that you encountered while you all were working on the Rajasthan platform gig workers act, which was seen as a breakthrough piece of legislation? I know it was passed by the previous government, which was the Congress government, and it hasn't been notified yet. But you want to just take us through some of the learnings and experiences that were captured in order to create that piece of legislation?
So the context, I think, needs to be seen is that it was the first law in India. It was
Yeah.
a breakthrough, and it was perhaps a breakthrough even across the globe, because it
Mm.
formulated this relationship drawing from the Indian labor movement. Um,
Mm.
the Rajasthan law, when it was coming, was faced with generally gig workers. When they have been exploited, they've been exploited by the app. And what they've tried to say is that, okay, we want an app of our own. And that has failed for all the reasons that a market knows how to make any new entrant fail, especially something that would reduce their profits. They know how to undercut them. They know how to do various other things, and it's a very big deal. Manage you're managing actually an entire business operation. Um, and the next thing is they all said yes, social security, and they wanted. There has been again, for instance, in the construction workers, where on your turnover you give 1 or 2% for social security, and then you leave it. That's all. It's over. What the breakthrough in Rajasthan was is that it said because your platform, digital platform, allows you to actually precisely triangulate who has done how much work on your platform, and therefore how much social security or wage are they entitled to. And that should be made transparent to people. So Rakshita will talk about the components of the law, but this even across the world said, okay, if you don't want to say employer employee, because you're saying they're free to come and go, they're only doing some hours in one day and next day some other hours and some day none at all, at least for the time that you are on contract with them. From here to the airport, I'm dropping someone, somewhere else, I'm delivering something. Then I am an employee. You are setting the terms of contract. So there you have all the responsibilities of an employee, where you will have to give your share of social security.
And because it's digital, it is easy to access exactly
Absolutely, and
all
triangulate
of
that.
that data.
Exactly. So it was for the first time the digital platform has only helped the aggregators and the companies and maybe the consumer, but the worker has been at the mercy of this. So if we say we want to do digital governance for benefit of workers, then the core of that operation should be available to them transparently. And that's and the Indian system of the board. I'll just say one more thing because it's important to acknowledge. Where we picked this up from was a 50-year-old struggle and then law of the Hamals in Maharashtra. Hamals are those who lift loads on their head. And at that time, 50 years ago, they said, on every bori that I lift, from wherever I lift, that money should go to the board and I should have a levy for my social security. So if I have lifted 10 boris, I should get social security for 10 boris. If I have lifted 4, I should get 4. And if I've lifted from 3 places, I should get from each one of them. And that goes into my ledger in the board. So that when I need pension or gratuity or anything else, it triangulates with the work I have done. That essential theory was what was picked up and put on the platform thing
As the
as the
bedrock of
bedrock.
this.
And that was a very important break. So, Rakshita, the
Yeah.
components of the
So
law,
just to
how
add
this
to it, because
translated.
yeah, it's the beginning.
Yeah, so there's a welfare board, there's a welfare fund. Do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, so just broadly, and again, this was the provisions of the law are very simple because it was through a process of campaigning, listening from workers, and the inspiration we took from the Mathari law. And the law basically centers around four key provisions. One, that there should be a tripartite board, which is the legacy of so many important labor legislations in our country. It's a board which has equal representation of workers, aggregators, and government. So, together, which has all the stakeholders concerned, are going to take the key decisions related to the implementation of this law. That's one. The second, which Nikhil had started talking about, which was this idea that every platform worker should have social security, but the social security is not some charity we are seeking either from government or from an aggregator. Uh, the basic idea that it is through my labor and through my mehnat that I am actually contributing to your revenue. I'm contributing to a transaction. I'm getting a payment out of my labor, and a part of that payment must include a social security fee. So that's the idea, that a part of the transaction or a part of the payment must contain a welfare cess fee, which is a percentage of the total payment, which is the basic principle of a social security everywhere. It's a function of how much you work and how much you earn, and that's how you get. The idea is then social security fund, a fund would be created which collects money from all these, the welfare cess fee that's made applicable, and you would have two kinds of social security schemes. One is a general scheme, which is irrespective. I might have joined Zomato as a delivery boy half an hour ago, and if I meet with an accident, I'm entitled to an accident benefit, a medical benefit, a death benefit. But there are some social security schemes which are a function of how long I have worked and how much social
Yeah.
security fund I have credited to my own account. So something like paid leave, skilling, maintenance of equipment, etc. The third key component of this law was because people's workers, and this is again our learning through our whole work on RTI, Narega, whether it's construction workers fair, workers have a right to know. They have a right to know how much they have worked, what their work has resulted in terms of contribution to the aggregator, how much commission did the aggregator earn, how much payment did I get, how much tax has been deposited, how much cess fee has been collected under my name. Because this basic, what we would assume, granular transaction understanding is one of the hardest things for workers to have access to. Even something as basic as this is not shown to them in the way they need to see it. So the third provision of the law guarantee transaction wise access to information of workers. And the last was this idea of a grievance redress framework, that if I have a grievance, I should not just be able to share it on a bot on a platform's app. I should have a person, somebody within government who I can file a complaint to, and this must be disposed of in a time bound manner. Each of these provisions, I think the least was the tripartite board, but every provision out of these other three was so resisted and fought against by the aggregators, and that continued. And but one thing, that after Rajasthan passed the law, we now have Karnataka about to pass a legislation, Telangana about to pass, Jharkhand, Haryana. And one definitely great thing that has come out of this is to show that state governments taking a lead on an issue of labor. There's no longer this thing of trying to wait only for the government of India to show the way. Labor is a concurrent subject, and states are also demonstrating an alternative.
In this piece that the Urban Company founder and Sanjeev Bikhchandani, and an investor in many startups, tech-based startups, and an entrepreneur himself, they wrote something which I'm quoting. They said, rigid contract structures, expanded inspection powers, and overlapping regulations between states and the government of India will create operational challenges. It will deter investment and limit job creation, and that will hurt the workers that are being sought to be protected. How do you counter this? What do you have to say to this fear that they are creating about how these regulations will actually hamper job creation?
So let's take this
Because
point.
that seems to be what they're putting forward to governments also, isn't it?
Yes, sure. What they are talking about, inspections, in fact, has never been asked for. All you need to inspect their platform itself is to make sure that what the law requires, are you carrying it out? And there's no better way than for them to share that data with the board and with the worker. That's all. That's the extent to which they are obligated. They are obligated to say that this is how much the worker we pay out, and this is how much their social security fee is. And if that payout also contains a minimum wage, then is that minimum wage norm being followed or not? That is the essence. Or if there is a grievance, whatever it is to do with that. And it does not require on-spot inspections, that whole Inspector Raj, which they seek to bring out. That they are trying to say that that's where it is far from that. It's transparency actually of their transaction with the worker to be given to the worker and the board. So that's the first point. The second point about deferring of this central regulations and state regulations, every Indian law, particularly in the social sector, if there is a central law, it is implemented by the states. Even Narega is implemented by the states. And today, if you see the three laws that we are talking about, none of them are in contradiction even to the unnotified code on social security, which is only social security, by the way. So for the workers, they need more than just the social security. Rajasthan dealt only with social security. It needs a little bit on wages. It needs a little bit on grievance redress, and the implementation will be left to the states. If you take another law, the Building and Construction Workers Law, it's a national law. There is a cess that is put nationally, but every state both takes all the money, finds the people to take the money from the cess to be collected, and has different schemes in its own states for how it can do it. Because that's the only way you're able to run a country of this size. And actually, we would argue the opposite. We would say some of the Indian states are bigger than many countries in the world. And if you have more creative legislation, and that's why labor is a concurrent subject, then actually you can work out a better relationship. And if you have a basic relationship of a tripartite board, you're there. What is your problem with that? You are there with equal representation to be able to talk things through to argue things.
Do you get a sense from the statements coming from the gig platforms and aggregators and industry bodies that there is that they would desire regulation to be from the union government and not from the states? There is that very clear. I mean, that seems to be underlying a lot of these views, isn't it?
Yeah,
They're sort of
absolutely.
trying to cut the state governments out of the picture, if
Absolutely.
possible.
That's a very clear, explicit and implicit intent. I mean, it's been articulated very clearly, and there's also been very active lobbying with the union government, and a committee has been formed, and all of that. And I mean, well, they're well within their right to try and approach wherever they can for their own advocacy. But just to add only 2 points to what Nikhil said, it's this idea of there, yes, the initial, and really, we really wish so many more legislations or bills go through such consultative processes. We have been, I mean, we've been completely insistent the bill be placed in the public domain, so more people look at it, more people draw out criticism, suggestions of what can be added, not added. And yes, the bill has benefited through a process of consultation. Many contentious provisions that were flagged by aggregators, discussions took place. And we, I mean, as civil society, have been really insisting that whenever there is a conversation, all aggregators and civil society ought to be in the room, which I'm afraid is not, I mean, that's not the same
Not the
sentiments
reality.
that I mean, no, we have insisted every time that there should be a tripartite consultation as well. That they do also have a right to say and suggest what they would like to, and so do we. And we should be able to understand what broad provisions make sense and don't make sense. So these bills, we must also acknowledge, have been in the public domain. A year-long consultation has taken place over it, and some provisions have been modified, keeping in mind the interest of what is coming off as feedback. And about the idea that yes, both the union, I mean, the fact that labor is a concurrent subject, the fact that both the central government and state governments can legislate on it is a constitutional provision. I mean, states have a right. And it's this is not the first law, which labor law, which will have both, as long as they don't contradict each other. So this idea of why there is this excessive reliance on there should be only one law, a centralized union government law, is also something that the constitutional idea at least doesn't promote. So we do want to be able to also protect the space of state governments to do more and to do more creative
You
thinking.
mentioned a little while back that the Rajasthan law focused on social security, whereas actually there's room to do more when it comes to securing the rights of gig workers. Do you see the Karnataka bill having those elements? And what are some of the things that you think all states which go down this path should include, which are not there in the Rajasthan law for now?
Yeah. So the Karnataka law was a definite improvement to the Rajasthan law. In addition, basically, there were 5 key provisions that were introduced. One was this idea, and this is something that if you just engage with gig workers, you will notice that this is one of their first grievances that is even articulated. This idea of arbitrary blocking of IDs, that ratings will determine blocking of ID, and there's not enough clarity on the causes behind, and the fact that they don't have a right to be heard. There is no due process or principles of natural justice followed. So the Karnataka bill provided a framework or norms for due process behind blocking of IDs. It introduced the concept of fair terms of contract, that if you do make people come under a contract, so even if it's one delivery, then there has to be fairness in terms of how that contract is provided or engaged with. The third is this idea of occupational safety. These people don't have a physical office, factory floor on which they go. The streets are their place of work, residential areas are their place of work. So, how do you assure occupational safety for these workers? That was the other idea. And so these were some, and the fourth, which was very critical, and this is where really Karnataka's breakthrough attempt, at least in the bill, was algorithmic transparency. Because it's not just a stated contract. The basic idea for any worker is I need to know how much work I need to complete to earn an amount of wage. This is the most basic information any worker would want to know so that they can understand how much work has to be completed. But algorithms make both these parameters constantly shifting. There is no guaranteed work assigned for the day. There is no guaranteed rate chart for a day. It's constantly changing, and workers are at the mercy of algorithms. They'll have to log on and wait on the apps for hours before an order comes to them. So this idea that algorithms, at least which determine workers' wages and their allocation of work, that part of the algorithm must be transparent, and workers should have a right to know what was input into the algorithm to give a particular outcome. So these were the four main provisions in the Karnataka bill, which really took forward, went way beyond what Rajasthan promised. And then additionally, now because of, I mean, this whole idea of now domestic workers, and if you now have Insta help kind of situations, we have to also see that minimum wage ought to be assured. So even if Karnataka doesn't have it, we would really push that Telangana, Jharkhand, other states that are now coming up with bills should have provisions of minimum wage. And there can be no piece rate or task rate offered, which is actually violative of a statutory minimum wage. So these are some additional protections.
If I can underscore, Rajasthan, there are two paths to any contract or any work. One is the wage in terms of work, and the other is social security. Rajasthan brought in social security in a practical way, and that was in a sense
Right.
even a global breakthrough because this transaction-based thing is a particular Indian contribution, and the boards are a particular Indian history of how you have
Right.
tripartite boards. But what Karnataka, in essence, with its fair terms of contract, means fair terms in terms of wages, means fair terms in assuring minimum wages, means fair terms in occupational safety, all which are inalienable rights in normal circumstances.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even algorithmic transparency. So, piece rate is a part of the minimum wages law, again, since 1948. So, if I roll BDs, if I roll 1,000 BDs, I know how much I'll get. Whereas here, I will not know. It will change from day to day, hour to hour, depending on all
Right.
kinds of things. So, a minimum I must know. And then maybe the
Yeah.
market can offer me more. So, this is a platform
Sure.
that should offer me.
I want to go back to the statement Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal made. Nikhil, do you think that's a sort of that's an acknowledgement? Do you see that as a positive sign in the way the government is thinking? The acknowledgement that a lot of these delivery apps, especially, are exploiting unemployed youth as cheap labor. Does
Two,
it make
two,
you
two
feel that there is a
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad acknowledgement, but it's
yeah
an important acknowledgement on two sides. One is to the entire government that finally are recognizing unemployment as a huge problem. That is itself a very big thing. We've been trying to do it through Narega all the time because Narega is not your first port of call for
yeah
employment. It's your fallback.
yeah
And we see it, and you're cutting Narega budgets, and you know people are coming. We see it because we work with those people all the time, that whole sector. And the other is to industry, at least we are not the ones saying it, that you're not out there doing some great job, plain and simple. The person in government who deals with you day in and day out and who's facilitating everything for you and saying Indian startups are so great, are saying please do startups that are worth not just a question of squeezing what finally are you doing when you're taking unemployed youth and using them as cheap labor. What is that? That is squeezing your profits or your business capacity out of those in trouble. And that's why again that uh, analogy that we gave of the market, the ticket, is basically what to our mind was an acknowledgement. uh,
I want to bring up something else that the government said, and this was Home Minister Amit Shah, who's also the Minister for Cooperation and therefore heads all the cooperatives in this, that sector, saying that there is a government taxi app called Sehkar taxi that they're planning to launch, so that this becomes, the people who use these apps or the drivers have more control and therefore a greater share, because this facilitation or the technology platform will be from the government and not by private entities. What do you make of this, and what kind of problems do you see, do you anticipate as a result of the government getting in on this role? Will you see better protection and better securing of labor rights and value?
Yes, we did hear that announcement, and the idea of, and it's not the first. Different, I mean, Kerala has the state government of Kerala, the state government of Delhi have
I
introduced
think Goa
apps.
also has
Yes,
something that's not really different.
Goa has,
Yeah.
has an app. Then the food delivery, the Restaurant Association has initiated an app for delivery. So there are efforts that are going on, and of course, none of these efforts are futile. They're important. We learn something out of it. But this, we very early on in our advocacy, even in Rajasthan, this came as one of the earliest. This is something that even Nikhil referred to as one of the earliest responses of workers itself. It's saying, what is it that these companies are doing? They're only providing an app. Why can't
Yeah.
government just provide an app and we'll get on it? And initially, even we were very, excited about this idea and thought, yes, this will be a breakthrough. But we understood that the app sure will add a certain degree of convenience and certain degree of some kind of transparency, but it's really not fundamentally changing the relationship between a worker and this ecosystem in which he has to operate in. And again, the details of who exactly will run the app, is it going to be a labor cooperative, is it going to be a government department, all of this will have a bearing. And so this, basically nothing will replace the need for a law. Even if you have an app, the app has to be subservient to a legal framework which will ensure that the rights of workers on even this app are protected. So that's essentially, that's one thing that I just wanted to say, that the apps are useful, and but they don't fundamentally sort out the kinds of grievances that these
Guarantee
workers.
what laws and legal laws
Right.
offer.
I mean, and if there was such an interest of government of India, then I mean, bring out a dedicated social security and regulation law for gig workers and bring an app within it, or at least ensure that states have the space to do it and not curb the freedom of states to initiate these kinds of legislations.
Right.
Yeah,
Nikhil, do you want to add to that?
yeah. I want to just say, yeah, app and law are two different things altogether.
Mm.
Law is needed for itself, and there is no doubt about it. And therefore, we shouldn't say, "Oh, now we have an app, so we don't need it." Uh,
Yeah, just because the government is securing or offering you market access does not mean that that market will be a fairer one.
Absolutely.
That's what you're
Yes,
saying.
absolutely. And the terms of that market being fair have to be laid down. That's the first job of government before it starts talking about other things. And government is not going to come in and own one new public sector app. It's only providing an app. The first thing the Rajasthan government said is, we'll do it, now you run it. Now, how do we run it? You need many, many things to be able to run it. All these companies absorb huge losses to catch people onto their own platform. Then they are able to function at a certain level. Companies like Amazon ran at a loss for 10 years, absorbing so-called losses, and then managed to get it. So these are things that they know, we know, everyone else knows. I do want to say that, yes, if government were to facilitate and be able to get people a better deal on apps, because they show that, this is the way, and yes, we have the wherewithal to provide all the maps, to provide other things. So here's something that you can use. We wouldn't oppose it at all. We'd welcome it. And the app will stand on its own on the market or sink on its own on the market, depending on what it is. But the law is something that is fundamentally important, and the relationships, because the law goes far beyond just what an app provides. The law provides for issues of social security, which an app may or may not be able to. The law provides for minimum fair terms of contract, which an app cannot actually. An app itself cannot. It can be fairer than another app, but it cannot meet minimum standards. Only a law can make you meet minimum standards. I do want to give an idea, just use this opportunity. Someone riding in Delhi in what are called these Kali Pili cabs, the government, if you go to the airport, and many states have them, where the state runs airport cabs, and just chatting about this law, that person said, why doesn't either the state government of Delhi or Delhi government give us an app? We ride back empty. We drop someone there, and then all the others get their rides to come back because we are not put there. Why doesn't government create an app so that people coming to the airport can also use our services? And we get that much more for it. So these are the kinds of interventions. That's not a law again. It's just opening up opportunities for people. You are regulating. You're regulating them to a rate from the airport to whichever home. You're providing a booth there under which there's autos or taxis are to do it. So maybe from all these points, these are much smaller than the larger issue.
Sure. I'm going to close this conversation with one common question to both of you. And that is, at the end of the day, and to go with the analogy you've used, which is the gig platform is the thekedar and the contractor who's getting the cheapest labor available to the employer, to the person who's actually getting the work done, which is people like me and you who may use these gig platforms. So, is the onus also on us, therefore, sometimes, because we really cannot see beyond the dirt cheap rates that we are getting services for, isn't it? So, is there a thought you want to leave people who are watching this conversation with?
Yes, the onus is on us as consumers, the onus is on government, the onus is on aggregators, um, and we at least, I mean, I think the first step of this process is first we have to acknowledge that there is a problem. I mean, just that fact in itself, and I think we've now been in so many stakeholder consultations with aggregators, and not once have we been in a meeting where anybody from the industry has said there is a problem. Yes, our workers need help. We might disagree on what the solution is. It should not be done this way, this should be that way. But at least we have to at least arrive at a collective acknowledgement that there is a problem in the way we treat our workers. And from there we can start thinking of what we can do differently. And I think this idea of and a part of that, yes, we also need to, whether we are buying into the system, whether we're going onto it as consumers. And this is where I also frankly and fairly tell keep repeating this in the meetings, that I use these apps all the time. My So much of my life is governed by these apps now. But this idea of really how we have enabled, I mean, this kind of an economy where we are willing to treat workers and people the way that they are. We are indulging in these 10-minute deliveries, 8-minute deliveries. Now, this is what it's. We really should question and should ask for more. As a society, we should be questioning all of this a lot more. And that's where two slogans from the movement, from the campaign that have come, really articulate this. This first, rating nahi, hak chahiye. Like, why are we buying into this? Workers don't want your 5-star rating. I mean, why should my preference, my rating determine what their wage should be, what kind of work should be? And that's where we as customers and workers should be allies, and customers should ally with the demand of workers. So the first of, rating nahi, hak chahiye, and insaan hai hum, gulam nahi. That we are providing a service and we have a right to be treated with dignity and fairness. So both these slogans, I think, give us an idea of where we really need to head towards. And as customers, we should at least acknowledge where the problem is. We should be willing to reflect where we're going as a consumer society, and we should really ally with workers and worker struggles and campaigns and movements, that they are all and that are coming together on this particular issue.
So I'll take off from the second slogan that Rakshita raised, कि इंसान है हम गुलाम नहीं, and go back to that same analogy of the ठेकेदार, where it is your choice between starving and taking the lowest possible wage that's being offered. In that negative option, the lowest bidder wins. The one which is a horrible situation, which is how and where unemployed people in India facing who want to work to carry their lives. That's what they're facing, and that's just that recognition needs to come through to everyone else. The Supreme Court, in dealing with the minimum wages case, said anyone who chooses to work at below the minimum wage is being engaged in forced labor because it is a force of circumstance. So it is gulami. It is gulami with that thekedar. It is gulami with your mass thekedar on these apps when you're not willing to meet minimum standards. That's something we really would like to communicate to the rest of society. Again, communicating with the rest of society on this, just look back to COVID. What did we think of those millions of people going home, walking What did we think? And who came and turned up and allowed us to work from home? Gig workers. They are the ones who were out there. We were not willing to go out, step out. We were not willing to meet our own relatives, and they were out there delivering to everyone, facing everything. And how much did we think of our connections at that time? So it's really something we need to think about as a society as a whole. What is it that we are doing? And today they are gig workers, tomorrow we are gig workers. That's the nature of where this work is going. This is something everyone needs to understand. And
I think that is the slogan that will probably resonate with with people who will probably watch this conversation, that today they are gig workers, tomorrow we are gig workers. Probably that will connect the most.
yeah, that's true. But somewhere we also need to make, as a society, greater and larger connections. And therefore, the third thing I'd say is, in this battle for a law that's only giving minimum rights, of course, collective bargaining, all that is almost impossible under gig work. You're all over the place in different places. So we are hoping some platforms for discussion will be able to emerge. But in this whole battle, it is your duty as a citizen to say these rights must be ensured. These are, and we are willing, they keep, again, companies say we're hardly able to survive. Actually, what are they surviving on? The consumers giving the money. The work is being given by the worker. All they've created is a platform. So consumers will say, not at our cost. We are paying the money. We are willing to pay that little bit extra if necessary to ensure minimum wage, to ensure that they have some sense of social
Sure.
security. So not on, don't argue that I'm not willing to pay that. Actually, ask any consumer, and they'll say, yes, we'll pay that little bit extra if these people are going to be insured their social security. So there's again another very important connection. That in
Yeah.
these battles for laws, stand on the side of the workers and what the minimum amount they're working for, and it's a very creative set of things that they're asking for. And
Yeah, and therefore the society that we are participating in creating.
yeah,
Those are good words, good food for thought. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, Rakshita. We'll keep talking. I'd love to keep revisiting not just this but other issues that concern all of us as citizens. Thank you for making time.
Thank you.
We'll keep talking.